Welcome to Rhythm and Bloom. I'm Jarrell Clay with the Hip Hop Caucus, and we are here at the Very Sad Lab, a plant rehabilitation center by artist and educator Naoka Wasugi. And we are joined by Imka, who is going to be using one of the plants here to create music based off its unique biodata. I'm talking today with Dr. Alexa White, the Think 100% Environmental Justice Policy Director at Hip Hop Caucus. And we're going to dive into what is happening in Michigan with its regulatory and utility fights. What's going on, Alexa? How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. We know that there's a lot going on in Michigan concerning regulatory fights and utilities, and it might be, a lot that people don't know about it. And so, can you tell us why it's concerning and how it impacts the state at large?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Michigan, before the November election, 70% of the lawmakers that were in-house, they were receiving funds from the companies DTE and Consumer Energy. The reason why that's bad is because they obviously are swaying their decision making. The consumers and the communities at large didn't really have any sort of knowledge of this prior to this study. And the environmental justice atrocities that are happening are influenced by these decisions. The communities don't really have any sort of influence on changing the regulatory processes that will prevent that.
So how are these decisions having us depend more on extractive systems like fossil fuels and things like that?
Yeah, so these two companies obviously want to stay in business. The majority of the resources that they're using are from fossil fuel industry. Michigan has a carbon neutrality goal of 2040, and the problem is that these renewable alternatives will not get introduced, have not been introduced, because of this lack of introduction from the community, as well as the lack of pressure. There's a differential between the amount of money that is being given through these companies to the lawmakers and a lack of transparency. And so the real issue here is that there is no way for consumers and communities to have input in this conversation. Two, there are higher costs because obviously they'd like it to cost more money to have fossil fuels. And three, there's no entrance for innovation. So if they can keep it as contained as they could, they would.
That feels like a good segue into how this connects to environmental justice issues, but it's also, I have to say, having a goal of being carbon neutral by 2040 and doing nothing to attain that, what was the point?
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that through some of these issues, we can get to that goal. But how does this connect to larger EJ issues?
Yeah, so Michigan was really put on the map with its EJ issues early on, I would say, in the fight. Flint, for example, and their water crisis, that is straight up just a utility problem, an infrastructural problem. It's a question of lawmakers deciding to upgrade systems and have these sort of innovative ideas. And the way forward for that and the way that we can actually assess the true needs of communities is by letting them talk and letting them be involved in these conversations. And so the issues with renewables and the issues with the differences in the places that we're getting these resources from these utilities is directly impacting, like making the higher costs for these utilities, and also not allowing them to be involved in changing what is right now.
You mentioned Flint, and I'm wondering how more of the state is impacted, particularly from a BIPOC and marginalized community perspective, how this impacts the state at large. I'm thinking places like Kalamazoo, thinking about Detroit, Lansing, Grand Rapids. How has it impacted the state at large?
Yeah, so the state at large, everybody needs power. The majority of DTE and Consumer Energy's resources come from fossil fuels and coal. And the reason why that's a problem is because they want to become carbon neutral. And so in all of these major cities, they're all relying on this monopoly. And so if 70% of the lawmakers across the state are getting money from DTE and Consumer Energy, there's obviously a huge barrier to entry for communities to be involved in those conversations and for them to have their voices heard when it comes to environmental justice.
I love it. And so hearing this information, if I were in Detroit and some of my family is there and in Michigan in general, what can I do to get involved in this fight?
Yeah, so the first thing you want to do is go to local environmental justice organizations. There's a slew of them. I would say in particular, pay attention to the Taking Back Our Power Coalition, which is a conglomerate of different environmental justice organizations. They have an implementation meeting every 2 weeks that you can have direct impact on. And there's always public hearings and public meetings for comment where utilities have to listen to the communities. I think that Michigan is a really unique place for these kinds of discussions. I used to live there for 7 years when I was doing my PhD. Getting involved at the local level is something that is really critical for this fight in order for us to change the regulations to help environmental justice issues.
All this sounds great, right? But as Black and brown people, we got to look out for the ops all the time.
Yeah.
What does the opposition say about this, and why do they think their influence in elections has been so critical for them over time?
Well, historically, they've been the only ones involved in the conversation, so they think they know the most. Typically, in these conversations, they say that they're experts, and obviously that's not true. If we were to follow suit with what they have in place right now, we would not reach the carbon neutrality goal at 2040. And the regulations that they have in place now completely ignore cumulative impacts and the health disparities that are happening within these communities. So sure, they can pay attention to the costs of these, and the consumers might mention the issue with the heightened cost of the utility, but that doesn't change the fact that there are several different analyses that communities have mentioned and very tangible outcomes from these utilities that have resulted in detrimental health effects. Again, Flint is a really good example of that. There are several different cities throughout Michigan that are having the same, if not more, issues as Flint. And yeah, we can't allow the utilities to just keep ignoring these health impacts and having these conversations among themselves.
I love it. Well, thank you for your time, Alexa. We appreciate it. If you want to get more involved in the climate justice fight, definitely go to hiphopcaucus.org. That's hiphopcaucus.org to get more information and learn how to get involved. And with that, that is your latest episode of Rhythm and Blue. Take care.